G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now, as you will notice, I'm doing a couple of videos surrounding China as I'm trying to grow my knowledge base on that and take you all along for the ride. And of course, those videos get significantly less views, but I thank you all for the support and the feedback also. Now, legends, of course, as always, we have a lot to go over, even more maps than usual because we missed then the map update yesterday. So we will be comparing maps and I have geolocations to show you as well, as there are some significant moves. As well, we need to go over what is happening in Ukraine. And Commander Syrskyi, he has said that the Russian spring offensive has started. So we'll talk about that, but I think that there's still some misunderstanding about how ceasefire operates when there is a country in a position of power and a position of weakness. And there's also some misunderstanding about the nature of this war and how Russia may fight. We need to look over how do you reintroduce, maneuver into a attritional war. Does Russia even want to reintroduce maneuver into an attritional war given their goals, and how there's a bit of a myth of that I actually disagree with given the successive and simultaneous nature of frontline movements. Or then we will talk about oil prices, sanctions, tariffs, and the effect that's going to have on the global economy and Russia. Now, something that I've had just an unbelievable amount of questions on is the claimed Chinese nationals fighting for Russia. The amount that I've got is insane. Of course, we're seeing Ukraine make a massive deal of this, especially Zelensky, which, in my opinion, is a bit rich when you consider the thousands into the tens of thousands of foreigners from all walks of life, all backgrounds that have come to fight in Ukraine and cross the border into Belgorod and Kursk as well. Operate systems that they were trained on in their home country, then operate those systems with the supplied intelligence and capability from the West as well. So no, I don't think that it is a big deal. It is very convenient, though, that these Chinese nationals, claimed just over 100, have been seen or have entered the war on the same days as the US has started a trade war with China, and as US and Ukraine try and work around their frictions. What would be far more interesting, and I've brought up before, is my suspicion that there is highly likely Chinese generals in Moscow learning the lessons about attritional protracted warfare that Russia is. But again, on that, are we not doing the exact same thing? So no, I don't think it is this massive groundbreaking news that everyone is claiming. Anyway, legends, where I want to start is oil prices, and we're going to go over this more and give not daily updates because we need to talk averages, but we will look into this more and more as I've become a little bit more knowledgeable on how to actually draw the information we need out of this. Now, I had a podcast last night, about 45 minutes long, that's coming out this Saturday, but it is all over this topic. The topic it is focused on is what is happening in the oil market. How much will that then affect Russia? So there's a few markets we need to look at: the Urals crude and Brent crude. Okay, so we're going to go over a bit of this. So the Urals crude oil, and this is what Russia's federal budget is based on. This is their primary export blend. This trades at a discount to the Brent because the Urals is heavier and more sulfurous. So if you're using the Brent price, it is slightly skewed in the positive for Russia. So we need to look at too this graph and the average. We'll bring this out. And something that we need to mention is that Russia's budget, this assumes an average of $69 per barrel. What we can't do is we cannot just take one day or 1 week and say that it is collapsing. Again, it's an average for the year of 2025, of which we are still in the first quarter of. Now, with this, what we are seeing is recession could be very likely in Russia. But from my then podcast with an expert specifically in this field, even a drop to $20 or $40 a barrel, it wouldn't be chaos. It would be recession, but it wouldn't be the Soviet Union 89 to 94 collapse that we saw for Russia, that it's not going to be that. It's going to be recession, retraction on the market, but not collapse and chaos. So let's look over the year so far. So we had a peak of around $77.50. Today we're trading at about $65.50. Approximately, it's traded at $61, which is 15.5% under the then, well, not required, but the budget assumed average of $69. Now, there is an important difference in the economy and oil prices versus the last 3 years. Why is this? Well, because of the tariffs. That the initial sanctions, this was aimed at Russia to hurt Russia's economy, which of course oil is the single most important factor. That's why fiscal price is very important. But these tariffs that have come out from the US, they hurt everybody. So not only will it hurt Russia with oil prices, but this affects countries' ability and willingness to support Ukraine financially as well, as there's going to be more and more strain on other economies, and potentially that may increase exponentially. How will their ability and willingness, which is already then sinking, I believe, to continue the funding in this war, how will that then be affected? Now, there's an important note on this. There are three main oil giants. You've got Saudi, the US, and Russia. Russia and Saudi Arabia have significantly lower costs to extract a barrel of oil compared to the US. So an overall drop in oil price, and we'll look at the Brent in a second, will impact US oil companies very hard and much earlier. And that can lead to massive changes in the overall global oil markets. So let's go over this a bit more. And the Brent crude, this is the global benchmark. We've had then a high of 84 for the year and a 64 and about 65 today. Now, this is where these can get skewed. Remember, however you present information is just as important as the information itself. The estimated production costs. The break-even cost for US shale oil producers is estimated to be around $62 per barrel. Russia's production cost can be $15 to $20 per barrel. Saudi doesn't provide numbers, but it is presumed to be much lower. Some have even suggested as low as $3 to $5 a barrel. So you can see much larger profit margins on top of this. Of course, there's a whole bunch of reasons from wages to conditions that impact this. But the fiscal break-even price is an oil price the country needs to balance its national budget, considering government expenditures and revenues. Of course, Saudi has very, very high expenditures trying to build up the nation. For 2025, the estimated fiscal break-even prices are Saudi. They are wanting around $91 per barrel. As stated, the Russia wants a Urals price of $69.7 a barrel. Now, the US, they do not have a national fiscal break-even price on oil due to the oil-dependent economies like Saudi or then Russia, but this is still relevant at a corporate level. The budget is less reliant on it, but these private companies can be incredibly reliant on it. As we see, these producers, they have an average break-even price of $62 per barrel for profitability. So if this then reduces below that for a long time, some of these companies will be risking going bust, going bankrupt, and then we could see a huge increase in that oil price as well. So of course, there's a lot of different factors in play here, from sanctions to tariffs to other markets that aren't dependent on oil, but the willingness to continue spending lots of money. But will we see a collapse in the Russian economy? From my conversation with an expert in this field and a doctor in this field was no. We may see a retraction of 2 to 3, maximum maybe 5 or 6%. But as far as everything coming down, no. So do we want to look at the spring offensive, what is happening there, or the maps first? Look, we are early in the video. Let's break down this and ceasefires, what Sursky has said and what I believe we need to be taking into account on the front line. So let's start here with Zelensky and we'll lay some foundational groundwork here. Zelensky has said, I believe that certain time limits will provide opportunities to put pressure on Russia. If you have a ceasefire for an unclear period, it is a frozen conflict. So saying the US, they need to put a time frame on when Russia needs to come to the table on then ceasefire. But it is things like this of why it is exactly the reason why the country in the position of power, Russia, will drag their feet on a ceasefire to provide time limits to put pressure on. This is exactly why Russia is dragging their feet to try and get themselves in an even better position. Something that needs to be bloody screamed from the rooftops because people just don't understand it. For some reason, is the country who is not in the position of power will not be calling the shots. This is exactly why Ukraine wants to be in a position of power so they can be calling the shots. But people won't flip that in reverse because they don't like it. The US is trying to mediate. There may be some limits on what the US starts to do, but that could, of course, be limited by the effect on the economy and then global markets and trade and the allies of America and how they are feeling as well. So there's a lot in that. But again, we need to get over this idea of calling the shots from a position of weakness in negotiations because Trump, he's not going to be seeing it that way. It's pretty clear how he does. Let's talk about then offensives. And in this article by Ukrainian media, according to Sursky, the offensive on Sumy and Kharkiv regions, which Zelensky has previously spoken about, these have already begun. Since the beginning of the aggression, the enemy has increased its group fivefold. Every month, they increase it by 9,000. In a year, it turns out 100 to 130,000. As of January the 1st, 25, there are 603,000 military personnel in Russia. Today, there are already 623,000. Now, with any numbers, massive grain of salt, but we know Russia is recruiting a significant amount of new soldiers for the war, month on month. The offensive on Sumy and Kharkiv regions has already begun. Last summer, in an interview with The Guardian, you said that Russia had achieved small tactical victories, but still had not made significant progress. Although the enemy is ready to sacrifice a huge number of infantry for its tactical victories, has anything changed since then? The situation has not changed radically. If we look from last summer to this year, things have changed a lot. The front line may be not as significant as then the views from the main partners involved in this, particularly the US onto Ukraine. The enemy continues its strategic offensive operation with the aim of seizing our territory, defeating our troops, advancing deep into the country, seeking completely to seize Donetsk and Luhansk regions, as well as parts of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, and create a buffer zone in Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv regions. And I can't then disagree with this. This is what Russia is trying to do, but these are all parts to achieve a goal of reducing Ukraine's potential. And they don't seem to want to stop there from the person asking questions. You see, despite all the negotiations, we are only observing an increase in the intensity of offensive actions. I'll talk about why this makes sense. There's a lot of people that don't seem to understand the reason between saying something makes sense and when you believe something to be right or ethical or moral. Zelensky said in an interview with Le Figaro that Russia is preparing for a new offensive on the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. I can say the president is absolutely right and the offensive had already begun because for several days, almost a week, we have been observing almost doubling of the number of enemy offensive actions in all main directions. So why does this make sense now? Heading into negotiations, potential ceasefires, why may Russia launch an offensive now? Now, firstly, there could just be that this is Ukrainian informational propaganda war like the offensives we saw claimed from Kursk into Sumy, and that's why Ukraine needed to have that offensive into Kursk, of which we say, well, nothing was ready in the spot, and it took Russia weeks to then mobilize the material to stabilize that. That doesn't exactly scream that there was an offensive ready to go. So it could just be that. But I want to break down why this could make sense and what Russia's goals with this may be. If the Russian forces are able to launch an offensive across a broad front, it will significantly alter the landscape of this conflict and may provide an opportunity for deep maneuver warfare, of course, a Soviet tactic. Of course, this all depends on Ukraine's current state of attrition. I believe this will have a greater political and diplomatic effect than a pure tactical one. As Karl von Clausewitz said, war is merely the continuation of politics by other means. So if Russia do launch an offensive, a tactical movement of troops, I think that there will be goals of trying to gain areas, but the overall goal will be to reduce potential and reduce Ukraine's position at the negotiating table more than just this square kilometre of ground. Even if Russia cannot sustain an increased tempo of operations for a long time, there are compelling reasons to escalate now. So even if they say we can only sustain this tempo for 2 or 3 months, there are reasons why you may want to do this now. Firstly, messaging to the Trump administration. By intensifying military actions, Russia signals that it can and will continue fighting and that the situation is only going to worsen. The message being the best time is to negotiate is now while you still have some leverage. 2. The stronger negotiating position. Russia already holds the upper hand. Escalation would add another card back into its deck, reinforcing its dominance at the negotiating table, of course, then putting an ace in that deck of, well, we're actually making now more ground and we have reconstituted the forces for further, much larger offensive actions. 3. Impact on Ukrainian morale. There is a growing sentiment among Ukrainian forces that the end game is approaching. Regardless of Zelensky's public statements, soldiers on the ground know the situation is deteriorating as they can see the US stepping back from support also. 4. Pressure on Ukraine regarding natural resources and the impact this can have. Increased offensives may push Ukraine towards a minerals deal, hoping to tie their economy further to the US. This would not only create tensions between US and Ukraine, because we know the deal in its current state is never going to be signed. Well, we don't think, but it would be very, very unpopular if it did, given what the US is asking for, but also will raise tensions between the US and EU, further fracturing that unity. Of course, these tariffs are already strained that relationship, and this could strain it more as well. So trying to speed that process along. As Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, opportunities multiply as they are seized. So with this, I see that it makes sense. Even if Russia can't sustain it for a long period, if they can increase that tempo, it makes strategic sense to me. Tactical, different. You're going to increase in losses, but strategy, it does. I've previously mentioned that Russia may attempt to reintroduce deep maneuver warfare to the battlefield. Now, on the surface, this seems logical, but I have my doubts, especially considering how Russia defines victory. And we need to look at what Russia is trying to do, not what you're being told Russia is trying to do by the Western media. Okay. To reintroduce maneuver warfare effectively, attacks have to occur across a broad front. It's a Brusilov offensive actions from World War I. But they also have to be simultaneous and successive. Even if the earlier offensives completely fail, you must continue to push on a section of the front line and multiple sections until areas start collapsing under that pressure, even if they fail. And this was, I think, the main failure of the Ukrainian 23 counteroffensive, was the initial losses shocked Ukraine that much. There wasn't an appetite for the simultaneous and successive operations to push and push and push to then try and get that opportunity to present itself. Now, this makes sense if you're someone who's still under the illusion that this war is primarily about territorial control. That makes sense. But for Russia, it is becoming increasingly clear to us who are open to different ideas and to try and see perspectives here, it's becoming more and more clear this war is about reducing Ukraine's long-term potential, not just land. Maneuver warfare against heavily surveilled and a well-armed enemy, even if they are weaker, it is going to be extremely costly in the drone era. You're moving armoured vehicles around behind the line. It's extremely costly. The battlefield has become transparent. Everything is seen, and large-scale movements are punished. Just look at the crossing into Belgorod, into Kursk, and when armoured movements come around the front line. Imagine that, but en masse. Even in a weakened state, it's going to be very, very costly. So does it make sense that you're not trying to reintroduce move, you're just trying to attrit and then reduce potential? Instead, what I think we are more likely to see is not this massive blow-the-whistle spring offensive start. We will see the non-spectacular grind that we are seeing and have seen for years now of 2 to 3 kilometres per day, combined with a sustained campaign of attrition. The goal in this for Russia would be to bleed out American patience and also Ukraine's capacity and their potential at a faster rate of attrition than Russia's own. The fighting will remain dominated by Russia's current advantage, which is long-range fires from FABs and artillery, followed by then clearance operations into degraded Ukrainian positions in small towns or smaller cities. Putin, he understands that the Washington administration, the current administration in Washington, is no longer drinking the Kool-Aid, no longer willing to deliver tens to hundreds of billions of dollars. And Putin intends to capitalize on that and capitalize on different positions of power presented to Trump as the primary mediator in these deals. Russia's war of attrition, though, goes far beyond the front line and beyond when the guns just fall silent. This is called post-war attrition. Moscow understands that simply remaining a threat just on the border somewhere, this is enough to cripple Ukraine's long-term recovery. If Russia continues to pose a credible danger, even if it's not moving forward, it discourages the return of millions of civilians who have fled over the past 3 years and will also keep foreign investors very wary of committing large amounts of money for reconstruction and long-term business ventures. This is precisely why Ukraine President Zelensky is so adamant at receiving firm security guarantees and why he's pushing so hard for physical NATO presence inside Ukraine. He knows that peace just on paper means nothing if fear still defines the future. So if people are not willing to come back, there's not willing to be investment because there's not guarantees in concrete, well, that causes massive issues and then post-war attrition massively. Attrition in this context isn't just body counts lost on the front line. It's about emigration, demographics, which are brutal in both Russia and Ukraine, and lost opportunities. These are all tools that reduce Ukraine's strategic potential over time that Russia is willing to lean on. So the potential lost opportunity of having then potential aggression on the border, then crippling demographics, and all of this as well plays into then how Russia is waging this war. Demographic projections that you see to support Ukraine's long-term viability are often very overly optimistic. And I'll give you how the numbers are skewed. And I'll be doing a piece with an expert specifically on this. Firstly, they rely on official Ukrainian casualty figures, which are almost certainly much underreported from the reality. Secondly, they presume Ukraine will regain full control over occupied territories, including, of course, the population that remains in those territories. These projections, they also, thirdly, assume that refugees who have left Ukraine into, most likely into Europe, that they will then return to. So it's taking those three, and that's where it's drawing its figures from, which are already not great. But if you actually take this into account and go, well, actually, very likely a lot of areas will remain under control, that a lot of these refugees, up to 70%, have said that they may not come back. And the longer this war goes on, of course, the less and less will come back as the integration in those countries becomes more and more. And of course, the realistic casualty figures. So that gives us an idea about how Russia may be continuing further offensive actions. You can't just look through the lens of they want X area. Yes, the commander at the front line doing tactical actions. They go, I want Roslev. But when you're sitting in the Kremlin, they are going, what movements create the best opportunity for us to reduce Ukraine's potential? And this is why I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Russia sit back in a completely defensive posture at one point and rely on just extending that war while trying to have the optic of good faith working with Washington. So let's go over a few more things from that Syrskyi then interview. He talks about then we've destroyed several storage and assembly sites for Shaheeds, which has affected the total number of their use. I disagree with this. Last month, we saw a number of records for use of Garand Shaheed drones, but of course, we have seen a lot of strikes on areas. He also has claims that our successful actions destroyed a long-range Tu-22 M3, long-range supersonic bomber for the Russian aerospatial forces. It said it landed, a drone hit it, and the cost is 100 million. The cost of replacement of one of these, no, it's probably more like 40 million, but that doesn't matter. There's no evidence yet of this. Again, with any aircraft, especially something like one of these, wait for actual evidence of that, because the claims around these versus the reality of confirmations and footage. And I mean confirmation from the opposing side, from F-16s to Tu-22s to Su-34s, primarily Su-34s. Our requirements for confirmation are very high. So let's have a look on the maps. And of course, we have Ukraine in the center of the screen, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, the red check you see on this map, that will indicate ground made by the Russian forces over the past 24 hours. The blue check, Ukrainian forces over the past 24 hours. So we'll work our way around the maps. Firstly, let's come into Sumy and Kursk. And what we can see between the 8th and the 9th, we have seen that the majority of Goyevo has come under the control of then the Russian armed forces, then seen to by the Ukrainian map deep state. So let's have a further look at this, though, from then Syriac maps. Now, he confirms this. The Russian army took full control over Goyevo and began advancing towards the border in this axis. Meanwhile, in Sumy, during the last 4 days, Russian forces advanced south of Basivkia and entered Lokneya, where clashes with the Ukrainian army began. So this is the border down here. This is Goyevo coming back under control, but I'm much, much more interested in this area of Basivkia that is shown in grey zone. So this is the red of Basivkia here. He says that this is under control by the Russian forces. It's at least has some presence here, but that the Russian forces are working their way towards Lokneya. So this will be very, very interesting to see what happens here, as there has definitely been a crossing of the Russian forces back into Sumy, and we may see just a flip of where the Kursk buffer zone, well, eventually that's what it was called, but we know the initial priorities and goals were much more than that. Maybe we'll see a bit of a flip there. Now, just to the east of here, we have where Ukraine crossed into Belgorod to try and draw some forces away when Kursk was, of course, collapsing. And we've had geolocations around Demidovka and Popovkia and these areas here. And then we have a bit of a better update with the Syriac map. After 2 weeks of intense combat, the Russian army managed to fully recapture the locality of Demidovkia, seen here, and expelled the Ukrainian army from Popovkia, which sits just to the west of here. So I guess wait out on that. It's hard to get an idea in Belgorod. The actual amount of physical troop fighting that I've seen has been very limited. Most of what I'm seeing here is Russian drones versus Ukrainian armoured vehicles. Now, let's have a look further on the maps, and we'll come then through the northeast sector, Vovchansk. We do have nothing changed on this map, but according to then the Syriac maps, there has been a slight shift right in the center here. Of course, Vovchansk has just been absolutely flattened everywhere. But where I want to come is I want to make our way down into turn E, as we are seeing some significant shifts in here and some very, very important ones. So this is turn E. Let's step back to yesterday, turn then this on. And what we see is from Kateryniivka through to Nevsky, a large advancement by the Russian armed forces. And of course, this is what Syriac has been showing for some time. This is an advancement of 3.7 kilometers. This is a long way, and at a minimum of, that doesn't measure like that anymore, let me do this, and a minimum of 6.1 kilometers wide. So this is significant. Now, was that in a day? No, I do not believe so. I believe this map has been behind for multiple days and has then caught up all at once, but likely more extreme than this is showing. So the Syriac map update on day 1140 showed further movement towards Nove, of course this red dot in here, but of course all this filling in, you can just see then the yellow here just to the south west of Makivka. So we can confirm definitely that advancement, but up to 1141, just a small bit of movement to the south of Nove, so then out more in this direction down here. But keep an eye on this front. This has moved very quickly, considering it's moved basically from then the turn E out to here over the past couple of weeks, some almost 9 kilometers. And I believe this will need to put further pressure on elements to the north of here, but this isn't showing the extreme of what it should. When we bring up this geolocation, what is just about at the A here, so just outside of here, we have a geolocation of Russians flying a Russian flag in this few minute video. So I need to skip through to 2 minutes 20. Where are we? Just a little bit further on. We see then these Russians with a national flag here, and that is confirming then Kateryniivka coming at least majority under control, if not all under control, and further expansion of this map that we are then seeing. So that is a significant area we need to keep an eye on. So south of here we have the Siversk front, Belogorivka, and of course to the north of this Verkhono-Mayankansky, which someone messaged me and said thank you for trying to pronounce that because I laugh every time. We have had movements shown by Syriac over the past week, and we have this again today. So this is this chalk quarry here, this red dot, this is Belogorivka. So what you can see is these are showing significantly different, and what we need to line up is where some of these tree lines and some of these reservoirs actually are, and it can be difficult to line up because it is so different. So this checked line down here, which you can probably see, this is the Donetsk-Luhansk borderline, which is between the yellow and red, and as you can see, it's significantly further along. It's up to about, let's say where my cursor is here. So that is significant shift. Actually further on, is that grey zone there? No, maybe about to where my cursor is here. So it is significant and showing that out from the chalk quarry that Russia is gaining more of those high grounds that sit there too. So just keep this on notice, because we have seen very, very little shifting around Siversk. And if Syriac is correct in these movements, could that be telling us something about the defense in Kursk maybe starting to give way, what has been one of the most stable fronts for the entire war? So we'll continue our way down the map, Chasiv-Yar, Kurdyamivka, areas you're familiar with. Then we get into Toretsk. And what you'll see today is some red check just to the east around Druzhba area. And you can see an increase in this grey zone. This happened between the 8th and the 9th, that increase in grey zone and then increase in control today. But as I say, Toretsk, it's very, very difficult to know exactly what is going on here. And we have a Syriac maps update talking about the center of Toretsk, further movements up in this vicinity here around, of course, where the oval is, just in here, or the stadium, I should say. So that's that stadium, not too far off, but they're taking control of buildings. The Russian reconnaissance groups began operations on the outskirts. So again, this is very, very fluid in here. And then up to Syriac, today's map here, showing that the majority of Toretsk has come back under control, as well as just where my cursor is here. But these then Tetikons here coming back under control as well, connecting down to this Nelipivka front that is said to be under control for some time. So again, it's very difficult to know exactly what is happening around this front. But we need to just come to then the west of Toretsk or to the east of Pokrovsk. And we need to step back then to yesterday, then turn this on, and we see a few significant changes. So To the south of Kalinove, we do see a Russian confirmed advancement here. And then Alexandropol, we do see increased grey zone as well. Now, this area in here from Sukabalka to Kalinove has shown significantly different over a number of different maps. And Suryak is no different. So this is this front line here. Remember, it is showing that the Russian forces from Alexandropol have then met this main service route, as well as around Valentinivka too. You can see by on these maps, and as well towards Kalinove, we can definitely confirm then this advancement across multiple maps. And then we come further west to Badanivka, Tarasivkia. We zoom in on here, we see where Badanivkia is, that there was an expansion of control. See where then this tree line is before we get to Tarasivkia, that this area is coming back under control of the Russian forces as well. According to Suryak, there has been a lot of changes on this front line in multiple directions. But we need to then come to today. We've turned on the check. You will see Kotliny, Udashny in between these two, according to then deep state map coming under control again of the Ukrainian forces. Again, it's difficult to know in here because you've got some maps showing the exact opposite of this. So just wait out on that. Again, when we have, if it's a Russian map showing a Russian advancement or a Ukrainian map showing a Ukrainian advancement, we need to wait until we have a neutral source or the opposing side actually to confirm that. Then south of here, then on the sort of Beni Zaporizhia front, we do see this filling in of gap in here. Not surprised to see this at this point in time. Now, let's come then to yesterday, and I want to show you something amazing in here. Notice my massive surprise, groundbreaking news that Rosliv is actually connected. What a shock. Oh my God, tactical genius, cut off, XYZ. Realistically, I believe that this probably most likely looks something like that. But we can see there is confirmation of that today, as well as further movement out from Rozdolny. We have the last update of the day. No changes shown around Lobkove area. Remember, there are geolocations that tell a different story to this. The south hasn't been kept up for the past year, realistically. And what we see today by Suryak is some major changes here. During the last 6 days, Russian army captured a series of positions between Kamyansky and Lobkove, as well as southwest of Stepove and northeast of Mali Shkabaki. So northeast of Mali Shkabaki, this is shown in here, of course, this red dot Shkabaki, this one's Mali Shkabaki. That's not fucking confusing. And then let's move back, and then we have where Lobkove is sitting. Then these roads, we have Stepove, Lobkove, that this in between here has been filled in, and up to Kamyansky through to Lobkove has been flattened out. So realistically, and it's probably going to show in my thumbnail, that it is looking like this. That is the claim by Suryak, and some of the geolocations we have shown you have said that that is potentially likely also. So we will see. Legends, I hope that you are having a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.